Hey, welcome to the 312th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Caleb King, Cal Barnes, and Daphne. I'm Oren Kaplan.
And I'm Matt Enlow. Today we've got Tony Yacenda back on the show. It's been kind of a while, but it's good to catch up with our old pal Tony. You might remember him from creating and directing American Vandal, a ton of Lil Dicky music videos, and also he directs a number of episodes for Lil Dicky's show Dave on FX. He's got a new show coming out on Paramount Plus called Players. It comes out June 16th. And we talked to him about designing a scene, what makes a scene good, what his approach is, and we kind of walk through the three different sort of styles of production that he tends to frequent. He does his mockumentary kind of where he's part of the show running team, one where he has basically complete control, then where he's in a more traditional scripted style television show with Dave, where there are showrunners to answer to and kind of other personalities, and then commercials and music videos where it's much more of a prescriptive and kind of reined in sort of experience.
Yeah, it's really fun. I always like talking to Tony. We really get in deep on cameras, performances, working with actors. I love the stuff, all the craft stuff you ever wanted to hear. You will get in this episode. Anyhow, before we hear from Tony, we'd love to remind you that we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/justshootitpod is where you can go. If you want to support the podcast, you can give us $1 a month, $4 a month, $10, and even $15, which will give you a Just Shoot It podcast hat, which I will personally mail to you. And there's a 22% chance that my daughter will draw some weird things on the box. It really makes a big difference. It not only helps us pay for our editor and all of the other expenses we have, keeping the show going, but also it keeps us going and keeps us motivated. And so check it out, patreon.com/justshootitpod. We appreciate you.
Before we get to the rest of the show, we have some iTunes reviews. That's another way that you can help the show. We have one that says authentic and informative, entertaining. This is what filmmakers need these days. Matt and Oren are honest and transparent with their show. It makes my day every week. I wish it was a daily podcast. If you're a filmmaker worth their salt, you'll listen to Just Shoot It Pod. Hey. Thanks, Zoomrix.
Yes.
Pretty good.
Steven Spielberg. Hope you're listening.
Best filmmaking podcast out there. The rigorous attention to the daily mechanics of directing, writing, producing, coupled with the sincerity and passion from Matt and Oren are unparalleled. Listen to them, listen to their guests, and you will be able to not only make a film, but you will have a strong sense of how to navigate the wild entertainment industry. So if you want to help out the show, go ahead and hop onto iTunes and write us a review.
And now on with the show. We're here with Tony Yacenda. Back on the show.
Welcome back, Tony. It's been too long.
Thanks for having me. But this is number 3. This feels good. It's 3, right? Or 4.
I think you were on at least one panel, right? Or were you on 2?
Oh, I was on the panel. Yeah, that's right. This is my 4th episode.
But yeah, I think the first time you came, you talked about Save That Money, Lil Dicky video. My favorite thing I remember from that, 2 fun things. One was that you were trying to make this music video for no money. And like one of the scenes, you have like a Lamborghini or what car did you guys have?
Yeah, we got a Lamborghini.
You had this idea of a montage of him trying to get Lamborghinis from all these different places and them saying no. And the first place you went to said yes. And so then you had to find other places to say no in order to make it work.
I'm happy you remember that.
Yeah.
People ask, like, did you fake it? And I'm like, no, but like we really did do it, but we had to show the process first.
Yeah, well, like any documentary, you're kind of reordering, resequencing things every once in a while.
But the other thing that I remember, I feel like when you made that video, it was like kind of really the common knowledge was that like a YouTube video should not be over like 3 or 4 minutes. You know, and I don't remember how long Save That Money is, but isn't it?
It was like 9 minutes. I think.
Yeah.
And you told us that you had this big debate with your whole team about like, is 9 minutes way too long? And everyone's like, it's too long. It's just like, no one is going to watch a 9-minute video. And then everyone did. Nowadays, it doesn't even seem like a relevant fight. But in those days, like whenever that was, like 5 years ago, if you made a long video, people will tell you that it's unwatchable.
And we'll get to the genius of Dave Bird when we get to the scene design segment, but I do remember like I was fighting with some of the label, like articulating why a longer video for this might work, but even I was like, I don't know, Dave, maybe we should cut here and here.
Sure.
And Dave had the confidence and just like the incredulity to be like, why would we not put the best version of this out? Is it worse at 7 minutes? Like, yeah, I guess it is. And he's He's the guy who is always like gives you the confidence. He's like my creative Tyler Durden. He's always behind me. Like, what would Dave do fighting with a network in this situation?
What I love about that mentality is that is basically the thesis for the television show. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. That television show that's him. Like the first time I met him, it was before Let Me Freak. That was or before Save That Money. I did 2 videos before that. The first one I did was like Let Me Freak, and he was like about to release this album that Save That Money is called Professional Rapper, and he was like showing me songs on it. I'm like, oh my god, this guy is so unbelievably talented. And he's like, this is just my first album. This isn't going to be like the album that makes me Kanye. And I remember being like, what are you talking about? You're like a YouTube rapper. Of course you're not going to be Kanye.
Yeah.
But he always had
Who do you think you are, Aquafina?
Yeah, being like the biggest star in the world, and had no reservation of like censoring. He felt no need to censor it in a way that I think like the 3 of us here.
Yeah, no sense of embarrassment or shame. Yeah.
He's like simultaneously like the most self-aware human on this earth and the least self-aware.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah, it's like Larry David meets Drake. Like it's both like he's a small dick pun, but also like I'm the biggest genius in the world.
There's a scene in Dave, I don't know if you directed this episode or not, but where he's like on the toilet and someone's like, oh, you're not using like the seat cover? And he's like, oh, that thing, isn't that for like women's periods or something? Like just the fact that this like grown man does not know what a toilet seat cover is, but he thinks it's like a woman's like, you know, accessory of some sort is just like that makes sense, you know, that he wouldn't know that. But at the same time, he's like,
it was the changing diapers thing.
Maybe. Yeah,
I didn't direct that episode,
but he still is so aware of like where he is in his career and what people think of him. And then, sorry to geek out on Dave, but my other favorite moment in that whole show so far, and I don't know if you directed this episode, but it's like when he's like putting on his performance for his like girlfriend and his roommate and their friend. You know, to show them what he's going to do at this like bar mitzvah or something. And they're like, okay, cool. So that's like, this is like where you're starting off and like you're going to keep working on this. And he's like, well, no, like that was what I was going to do. But apparently, you know, you don't think it's good enough. And I feel like every pitch I have is like, they're like, oh, cool. That's a great starting place. And you're like, well, that's the ending place.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is funny to get like that's always with script, and I think like in the pre-pro phase we're always like, no, this is really good, and other people aren't seeing it, and rightly so, and you have to do the work. And then we are on the other side in like post where you see the first cut of something and you're like, oh my god, this is horrific. Yeah. I can't let anybody else see this.
What have I done?
If like you let somebody in and get some feedback, you'd probably be okay. But it's funny how that changes between like the script where I think it's great and it's not, and then the first edit.
But it's like you don't see a lot of shows about the creative process in the way that Dave covers it, you know. And I wonder if it's relatable.
They do it in such a thoughtful way, I think.
Mm-hmm. I am always impressed with people who can see a script that's really written very dryly, you know, where the jokes aren't super hard, you know, they're maybe character based or just kind of like performance based, right? Like a lot of Dave is, where you still get it, right? And sometimes that's just the craft of writing. Sometimes like the pros can really like bring that out, but it's not always there. I feel like I've read plenty of great screenplays where I was like, oh, after you see it produced, you're like, yeah, now I get it. Why didn't I see that on the page? You know what I mean? Is it just that everyone's already keyed in to what's happening in Dave and we know the voice of the show and so you have a pilot at least to reference, or are there ever instances where it's like, is this joke sharp enough? And then you realize, of course it is.
Yeah. And then there are times where you get on set and you realize it wasn't, and you kind of need to find it. The writer's room is a bunch of really smart people who know how to write to Dave's voice. And
Mm-hmm.
Dave is such a strong, active, like, captain of his own ship and knows, like, these are the types of scenes that work. I'll be able to make this funny. So even if, like, you get to the page and some joke that Dave wrote for himself isn't really landing, or some joke that another writer wrote for Emma or Allie isn't really working, you can find it out because, like, the bones are there. Like, that's the common thread on both shows that I've worked for, is like, you really need a smart writer's room to make sure there's structure, there's a reason for each of these scenes to exist, and that there's, like, a comedic driving force to a scene. But then, you know, there's some scenes that read really funny that fall flat, and if any of us knew how to read a script and fully translate what was good and what was bad and see how it was going to end up, we'd be
and you wouldn't need to shoot
Hollywood.
Sure. I remember our previous guest, Micah Fitzerman Blue, who was one of the writers on Transparent. He said that, like, in every scene, they would just go, they would think about the feeling that you want to get from that scene, and that would just drive everything. I thought that was, like, an interesting way to think about scenes. You know, it's kind of, I mean, similar to what you're saying. Like they're not just a purpose. Doesn't need to just be a plot device, but, like, there's some feeling we're supposed to get from the scene. And, like, if on a good show, it's clear for each scene, and you can get that. And I think from a performance point of view and a directing point of view, you can probably latch onto that.
Yeah, for sure. Those are the conversations that you always have to have, like, at Video Village, if you're lucky enough to have, like, other writers that were there, and, like, well, we got this episode and 6, but if this scene is too dark, we need them to, like, hit this low point in Act 3. So they need to, like, all the writers are kind of, like, looking at all of everybody's trajectory and trying to remember the forest above the trees. And that's a fun challenge. But I've actually gotten to the point where you're having those, what's the emotion of this scene, or I've gotten to the point where there are some actors that I think are, like, really know the story, really know the script, that are at, like, the top of the call sheet on in a lot of scenes. And my direction has gotten, like, super transparent, where I'm like, look, the audience needs to, this is what the audience needs to feel from this scene. They need to feel like you guys are friends going into the scene. Then he says this thing, and I just, like, walk them through the
it's almost like
experience.
a structural note rather than, like, what their motivation is or something, right?
And I've had mixed results with it, but there are certain actors, like, if an actor looks at me like, why the fuck are you telling me this? And then it doesn't, like, I will stop with that. But I've had a few actors that, like, kind of respond to that. And that is, like, the most simple and most important data I can give them. And that's been fun with a couple of actors I've worked with lately.
That's really interesting. And I know we're way off on a tangent, but I'm going to keep poking at it. Is there any sort of through line to the sort of actors that respond to that sort of conversation, to that sort of direction? Do they have more ownership in the story? Do they have a writing background? You know, are they self-generating themselves, or is it just kind of the luck of the draw?
It's, I think, when they come to me and they're like, okay, but why would I say this if I'm saying this in episode 8? When they're not just, like, talking about the scene at hand, because some actors just want to focus on the performance in this scene. But when an actor is seeking that kind of macro direction, then I feel like, in my experience, that's an indicator that they're more into, like, seeing how the full story plays out. And I give them that, like, extra data. It might sound like I'm giving advice or something, but one of the actors that I've used that with, who I think it's worked really well with, I think kind of rolls their eye and thinks it's a hacky move. I don't think it's not something, you know, Louis Kazan would do or something like that. But hey, it's working for him.
We're happy to get advice, and I feel like that all the performances and your things that I've seen in the last like however many years have been pretty amazing. So either they're working despite you or because of you.
Let's hope it's because of me, but I don't know.
It's a win-win, man.
It's a win-win.
I think it's an interesting way to look at directing actors. You know, a lot of times you hear actors say you want them to trust the director because you're the one that is like that's why like very famous actors don't want to work with like first-time directors, because they want to work with someone that they know they can rely on to tell them if like what they're seeing is good. And as a director, you're really just kind of translating what the audience is. And so I personally, I always talk to actors. I say like, hey, we're gonna do this medium shot. We're gonna frame you like this. And, you know, if you turn like around here and the light hits you, it's gonna be really nice for that part when you're happy. We're kind of like building these different elements together to give this sensation, you know, that like something super exciting is happening. And like one of the reasons I do that is especially when I have like nothing else to say, I feel like it's just an easy thing to talk to actors about is like how you're shooting the scene. But also I feel like I'm treating them, even if they're a first time actor or like super experienced, I'm treating them like a colleague, you know, like a peer, as opposed to like a lot of actors, I think, get nervous that they're just, you know, also plugged into this machine that's already running and they don't want to get in the way. But I want to make them feel like they're like a part of the team, you know? There is that Judith Weston trick, which I feel like I've talked about way too many times here. But it's like, if you don't know what words to say to motivate your actor, you know, to get them in the headspace, all you know is like the emotion that you're trying to get. Like you want the scene to be happier. Like you said, you want this couple or you want these two people to be friends and then not be friends, you know, after this line. She says, like, if you can't find the right words to use, the right kind of action directing words, just tell them, like, you want them to be mad, but you don't want to tell the actor like, oh, okay, now you're mad. Like the best thing she says is just tell the actor to make the other actor mad.
Oh, that's interesting.
Try to make him laugh. Try to make her be happy. You know, like literally whatever you want them to do, just tell them to try to elicit that emotion from the other actor. And it will kind of like get the gears in their brain going as to like how to get there, you know, so you don't have to do that work.
I think I've heard you say that before. That is good advice, though.
Yeah. It's like her like last ditch effort. Like if you don't remember the like seduce him and walk him in, then all those action verbs that she's like really into.
I'm allergic to the pageantry of it. Like I am a real results oriented guy. And if like your reason for not giving a certain type of note to an actor is because it's not like the type of note a good director gives, I'm like, fucking get over it. If it is like a 30-second commercial and you need the cashier to say the line in a certain cadence, I'll do a line read. My aversion to line reads is like, if it's an actor doing a bigger, like multiple episodes or has like a full arc and it needs to be a cohesive performance, if all of the actors are just like mimicking the director, it feels less organic.
Well, so I think what I'm really hearing, and I think the podcast kind of really reminds me, that's a thing I learn over and over again, is it's really just like, how do you diagnose what language does each performer speak? And sometimes it's going to be really easy to kind of short circuit things. And sometimes they're not going to respect you if you do X, Y, or Z or whatever. And so it's just kind of like, the sooner you can figure out what sort of performer they are, the faster you can get to the results that you're looking for. I think is the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well put.
Lauren, you had a question for Tony that was going to kick off this big conversation, yes. And we've already started unraveling the thread, but get us back on track.
So we're going to talk about scene design, but before we talk about that, I just want to talk for like 2 minutes about website design, because I went to your website today and I was shocked by what I saw.
Is it?
It basically is the website of a man who has made it. So I'm curious, because I think you did have a website. I think I went to your website, a couple of years ago. You used to have like some commercials, a trailer or something from American Vandal, some other things. But now your website basically has your agent, your manager, your reps. I think that's about it. So I'm curious, like how much you have to do with that. Or like, were you advised to do this?
I wasn't advised to do this, but I realized like my commercial production company is excellent. They're better at curating what people look at than I do. And I asked them if a website is helpful, and they're like, not for us. We want our sales reps going exactly to them. And then for like film and TV, they know American Vandal, they know Dave. If they haven't seen it, it's easy to just like IMDb and look it up. It's a little bit of a bummer that like some of the early short films that I'm like really proud of and that like people might have seen, like
your Space Jam documentaries,
like, hey, the Space
or
Jam,
even your music
like,
videos.
Save That Money or something where people could go like, oh yeah, he directed that one. I like that. There's no like central place for that, but it just was feeling. It ended up like feeling like at this point it's like it's entirely a vanity thing, and if there's any chance that like if anything, a commercial production company or an agency might look at something, see something they don't like, and maybe I could lose a job for it. So if the version that requires less work is the safer option, let's go with the easier option.
I think that to your earlier joke and point, like at a certain point in your career, looking like you want the job becomes a pretty big detractor. Do you know what I mean? Seeming desperate, seeming thirsty, seeming sweaty, makes it seem like you're not in demand or you're not busy or you're not working on your own stuff or whatever, right? Like, and so once you're in demand, anything you can do, especially when it's easy, to not seem so hungry for it, so thirsty for it, is good.
There's truth to that, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, but he has this, like, obviously you go to TonyYacenda.com and it's got 3 Arts Entertainment Management, CAA for film and TV, and Smuggler for commercial and music video. I guess my one question / suggestion, maybe you have a good reason not to do it, but you could make Smuggler a link to your page on the Smuggler website.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Because then it's kind of sneaking your work in, but it's making sure they're curating it for you,
That's a great idea. I'm going to do that.
We wanted to talk about how you figure out how to shoot a scene. You've done a couple mockumentaries now that you kind of had full control over the characters. You're one of the creators of the show. The style, you probably were very privy to the budget and had to work within some limitations. You've worked on a bigger network TV show where you're kind of working with an established look. And obviously you've done commercials and music videos where you have a decent budget, but not a lot of time. And you have clients and agencies and other people, but also are hired because you're you. And, they want to see how you would shoot this commercial. So we thought we'd go one by one and kind of talk about how you approach, I guess, the visual approach and the tonal approach to how you shoot these different ones. So
yeah, the scene design.
Yeah.
And we're sort of walking through the spectrum in order, right? From like the most run and gun, like the idea of like no prep, just pick up a camera and see what happens, to the other end is like everything. You have a full previs animatic before you even get on set. Like those are the extremes. And I feel like my work, my TV work is on the more spontaneous run and gun side by design.
Relative to TV work or just generally speaking?
I would say relative to so the mockumentary stuff is like the goal is to really stand apart from even the television mockumentary and subconsciously have our audience file it in with like reality and premium documentary stuff that they have seen.
As opposed to, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but like Modern Family or The Office, those are quote unquote mockumentary, but like everyone knows
those are like
that they're scripted shows.
Those are the Christopher Guest rules, which is basically verite coverage, and then you can cut to a confessional interview. And and it's gone even more like Modern Family is just like it's pure sitcom, and then you can cut to an interview joke if you need it, and it really works because it just gives you another button to push. But for us, we want to like really this show that we're doing, it's a take on the Last Dance, which is the Michael Jordan documentary that came out. So the last one was like a sort of take on the true crime documentary. That's a dick joke in a high school. This is a premium sports doc, but in the world of professional esports. In each of those, the coverage style is one where we have like really architected, like establishing shots that get you into there, and some like B-roll of people sitting stoically and thinking, and all of the toolkit that you would have in a premium documentary. But the actual scene work should feel like the cameramen had no idea what was going to happen. And from what we've seen, I feel like multicam scene work feels more reality TV and mockumentary, like the cross coverage style. So we tend to do a single cam style, and the way you cut a single cam documentary is like stealing reactions. It's a lot. It can be way more profile-y, and it's way more jump cutty. And the idea is like a 1 minute scene that you're watching in our show. The idea is that this was a 45-minute conversation that the editors have cut down into a 1 minute scene. So we don't tell our camera operators. So my shot list for a 4-page scene that's just like all verite scene work would just be like pivot point is what we call it. It's 2 cameras and they'll go wherever so I don't shot list it at all. I don't even do a rehearsal take. I'll just let them go. And
have they seen a blocking rehearsal?
They have not seen a blocking rehearsal.
Have they read the script?
They've read this, but we do like the improv first. We'll do the fat version first. And because the most like awkward real moments are found in those early takes. And then most of the usable stuff is in the later takes. But you can find, if it's ever feeling too scripted, you can go back to those early takes where the cameraman had no idea where they were going. It's a 8-minute version of
they're stuttering, people are talking on top of one another, all of that stuff. Yeah. That's so exciting. And we I feel like we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but I guess who knows what is going to happen, where the actors are going to stand and what they are going to say before you roll on that first take.
They need to have the bare minimum information before they're like, Tony, what are we doing here? And that like, Tony, what are we doing will happen once a day where I'll find out I haven't given them enough information. I'm like, no, you're here. You're going to walk over here and you'll have a conversation and something will happen. That might change, but then the camera ops might find themselves backed into a corner and they're in some awkward angle that actually ends up looking really good. And then in middle takes, we might like adjust to like correct for that. But then in later takes, sometimes I've been like, no, I like that like awkward, cramped angle we had. It felt very real.
And are they have a zoom lens usually?
Yeah, but both cameras have a zoom. So what we do is we have 2 cameras, and it's supposed to, when you're watching it, it's supposed to feel like it's 1 camera, but it's 2 cameras sitting like hugged close to each other. And one of them is a little bit, we call it the more left brain. And it's just like coverage, punching in occasionally to singles, but you're like tracking who's speaking. And the other camera is like drifting more to tighter and reactions and hands and things that they're looking at and giving us more cut.
The artsy.
Because again, it's like supposed to be like a 40-minute conversation cut down to a minute. So we would have all of that stuff if we were filming for 40 minutes. And we're just like stacking the deck by giving us that second camera. And then it's a challenge in the edit not to like abuse it by cutting from camera A to camera B in real time, because that will feel not like you're stealing a reaction from something else, but it'll feel like there are 2 cameras there. And you need like bumps in continuity to feel like it's jump cutting like a documentary. So that has like a really unique coverage style that's like prepared chaos that we had like long philosophical conversations before going into it. And then, but now that once you're like up and running, it's just kind of like, all right, this is a pivot point scene.
So do you have a shot list though?
We do, but it'll be like, it's just basically, it could be a 6-page scene and the shot list will just be like a non-sync establishing. So it's basically...
Non-sync means no audio?
Yeah, we do record audio, but it won't be synced to the... So it'll be like the camera recording before they started talking. So if it's a scene at the dinner table, it's just like them talking, standing up around the dinner table, and maybe like one character's missing, so that like you could see that and then cut into the scene. So it feels a little bit more like we have that. Yeah,
right?
I stage
like there can't be water bottles and there can't be like people holding script and all that stuff.
For sure. But that's pretty much it for like the scene work is like you have that one look and then everything else is just single camera, or like this, what is supposed to be in theory, a single camera pass of this whole scene.
Can you talk a little bit about like how you approach lighting and art direction when you don't know where you're going to look?
We have those conversations early in prep where you're like, the world needs to almost always be dressed 360. And if there is a real financial reason why that's impossible, we can certainly like, can we shoot this scene 270? Can we shoot this scene where we're only looking one direction? And we can have like, you got to be pragmatic and know how to stretch a dollar. So sometimes we will do that in a location, but like the expectation is that you're going to be lighting the world and seeing 360
and lighting from the ceiling, like no stands.
270. There's stuff behind us where, you know, you're avoiding certain lights and stuff,
and I imagine also there's probably some post paint outs and stuff as well, right? Like you clean up stands every once in a while if you end up seeing one, or is that a rare?
For sure. And then sometimes like if you see a little bit, you're like, okay, well, they would probably like if you could buy them lighting the world. And the other thing too is like, it's nice in ours that we have, I was talking about like the really nice like B-roll shots and the interviews and stuff that are really well lit. It's nice. Part of what makes ours feel like a real documentary is cutting from the lit like cinematic B-roll, which is all shot listed, and then cutting to the scene work that is super raw and unlit. And there's something kind of dramatically compelling about like seeing the establishing shot be way more beautiful than the most dramatic moment emotionally in your movie. That feels like kind of awkward and weird coverage.
It makes it feel authentic, right?
Yeah.
Like the language is like, here's the stuff that we prepared and here are the things that we kind of caught on the fly. And what I love about it is that, you know, everyone has worked so hard and trained so hard to make things seem effortless. And you have put a ton of obstacles in their way so that you see the effort. You're showing your work. You're feeling footsteps as a camera moves to catch something that they didn't realize was coming, right? Like you were saying before of like that feeling of like someone saying like, Tony, what are we doing here? Right. That's evidence that you have intentionally built a scenario that's so hard for them that they can't make it seem seamless, which is the thing that they are best at doing.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Because then you're giving the camera ops the objective to like, it's not giving them to the objective of like, hey, make it look shittier than you normally would. It's like, do the best that you can. And because that's what real documentary photographers do. They're trying to get the best coverage possible. There's just only so much you can do when you don't know what's going to happen in front of you. So that's why it's
but you're also
a little bit more familiar.
Yeah, but you're also like, I mean, you're trying to backlight, right? You're trying to like get like
no, they're trying to backlight. Tony's trying to make them stand in front of the light on accident.
No, well,
that's exactly
right.
And the camera op will be like, the idea is that the camera op would want to stand in the part of the room with the best light, and might even like be like, hey guys, if you're going to talk, can you have this conversation? I believe they do that in Making a Murderer,
No, for sure.
or they do that in the last, like,
Sure.
hey, if you're going to have this conversation, can you do it over here where the lighting is better? And we just kind of have that internal logic that, like, would a documentary crew be able to ask somebody to do X, Y, and Z?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've seen American Vandal, and that's like a good looking show, like it totally captures the aesthetic of these kids shooting it on their own. But it, even in the second season, I think you guys acknowledge it. You're like, oh, Netflix gave us all this money so we can, like, we got a drone, we got all this other stuff,
Yeah, but that's if you watch The Jinx, which is a big reference. It's like The Jinx looks fucking incredible, but then some of the verite stuff looks super raw and unplanned. And next to the cinematic recreations and the B-roll and the interviews, the disparity in production value between the different types of media is what makes it feel so dockish, and that's something we lean into.
Right. But do you still take that footage and bring it to Company 3 and grade it, do the best grade?
Yeah, because that's what they do, right? Like, they take, it's minimal lighting or no lighting, and then it still looks pretty great because you have the world's best colorist taking this verite footage of Robert Durst walking through New York City with a DP who doesn't know where he's going to go. He doesn't know the blocking, but they can correct it in post. And, like, setting those limitations and obstacles with us on the production end, and then trying in earnest to make it look the best that it can, is more true to, like, the documentary process than, like, what we felt was the pitfall of the mockumentary, is like having something well lit, looking good, but, like, let's degrade the camera and, like, see the boom mic, and then have, like, some of the actors spiking the camera. It's like, good documentaries now cut all of that shit out of the documentary. A good documentary, a bad mockumentary is adding flaws to look more like a documentary, and a good documentary is doing everything it can to try to feel like a movie, like it's not a documentary. And we want to, that's our kind of philosophy.
Yeah, man. I'm constantly thinking about, like, what good, quote unquote, is, right? Like, I'm always trying to think of, like, what are the philosophies that guide this project? What is our standard? What means the things look good or bad, right? And I think that it starts in prep, but I think, like, getting a team on board with understanding what you're aiming for, even when it's against their instincts, is kind of the name of the game with directing. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes you just have to, like, keep them from doing what they naturally want to do. They naturally want to light it so it looks as, quote unquote, beautiful as possible, or any of that stuff. And I guess, to me, I've just been obsessed lately with the idea of, like, how do you get people to understand that, a really well exposed image isn't necessarily good or bad. It's just, like, what you were trained to think is good, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's right for the project, right?
And it depends from project to project, which I think is maybe a good segue for Vandal. It really, and players, it's like these big high level conversations where it's tough talking to a production designer or, like, a wardrobe and like, hey, I know, like, we want to come up with a color palette because that's like, that's the most aesthetically pleasing thing to look at. But, a real high school doesn't have a production designer, and we need to throw some stuff in that's, like, awkward. And if the audience feels like, hey, this doesn't seem like a real TV show because I'm seeing too many, like, ugly shirts with logos, then you're like, all right, yeah, we need more of that sort of thing. And you have that question of, as you said, like, the consensus of what is good. And as a director, it is your job to, even if you can't convince everybody that is good, they need to understand why that is right for a given project. But on TV, to switch to Dave, as the director, I was not that person that is explaining to the crew what is right and what is not right. Like, and I don't know if this is the same with all TV shows, with all creators, but Dave Bird is a genius, and he's as hands-on as any creator will ever be. It is his show, and he's telling me what is good, and he has like an incredibly close relationship with our cinematographer Brian Lannon, and they're constantly trading images and references and talking about films. So those films and references and Google Docs are coming my way.
And you have a history with him too, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. And I get certainly his sense of humor and pacing and performance and tone. It's interesting to work on 2 seasons with this show because, I came on early enough that in season 1, I feel like I was a part of like really gelling the look and feel of the show and getting the show on its feet. And then by the time I came back for season 2, I had one of the later blocks, and I would come in and I would have my shot list and like how I thought a scene was going to block, and I would have like overhead sometimes of like, okay, he'd come from here and here, and it would be it would be a starting point for Dave and the actors and the cinematographer to be like, okay, that's nice. But what if instead of coming to the table, they went to the couch, and like all of that work? They're so good at this point. And the 2 camera ops, Andy and John, would be like, okay, yeah. And then I'll come over here, and then my 2 shot becomes a 1 shot. And they have this muscle. It was cool to watch. And I will admit, it was like almost as a spectator. When it came to like my shot list.
But it's interesting.
Sorry,
go ahead,
you got a good, an important question. How did it feel, Tony? Personally,
a little embarrassing. I mean, it helps.
It's so validating to hear you say that, Tony. And I think genuinely, I want people to hear it, because I think we've all felt that sometimes, of just like, dang, like you don't want to get in the way, but like,
you want to be helpful.
But you're like, hey, I'm good at this. Sorry, keep going.
At that point, it's like, and then you're looking at like the gaffer and the key grip, and you're like, these guys probably think I'm a fucking hack because I'm just like getting in your way. And but then you just got to remember what you are good at, and it's really knowing Dave's voice, understanding the characters, understanding what the show needs, understanding the macro of the story. Like, they have all of these other episodes, and I'm like, yeah, but this scene really needs to set up for this next scene. Like, talking to the writers a lot, like just knowing where you are useful. And it's not like
you're not getting steamrolled, obviously. I'm not
irrelevant in the shot listing progress, but I am probably the 5th most between. It's Dave is the most important voice, then Brian,
the DP,
and then from Brian, it's the 2 camera ops where they start doing the math of like the coverage in their head. So my shot, because we also don't have time. They also have a sense of efficiency that's really incredible, where like the 2 becomes the master here.
But who's figuring out the blocking? Is that you or Dave? Like, for them to figure that the 2 becomes the master, you need to know where people are standing in the room, right?
Yeah, so that is the big blocking rehearsal. And that blocking rehearsal can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes, and figuring out how it goes. And I think it's Dave, I present what I think is the first step. And
you've already showed the DP, Brian, and stuff, where you want to put the camera, right?
No, I present what I think for blocking. And then in that blocking, I'm like, and I think we would shoot it, this is basically how the coverage should be.
But but how does lighting play into that? Like,
we haven't gotten there yet. This all like, they've been shooting episodes while I've been tech scouting. So we have a sense of how things are going to go, but when there's not enough time for there to be like, we've tech scouted enough to know that we're shooting in a general direction in this room, most likely. But we're really figuring it out in the moment, in this blocking rehearsal, and anything can change. And I think that's partially because Dave, like when he's with the actors and acting out the scene, it's no longer theoretical in a tech scout, and Dave is on all of the tech scouts as well. But it's really like, oh, I wouldn't do this. She wouldn't do this. Like, I would sit down here. I don't like this. This is the most important part of the scene to me. I don't want to be like, you shouldn't
in profile for that,
this plain wall, or like Dave has all of those things. And then those notes from my blocking, then Brian translates with Andy and John to figure out the arithmetic of how to fill in all the gaps of the coverage.
It's just so crazy because I feel like people that are listening that have not seen Dave might not realize it. Like from the way you're talking, it sounds like, okay, I have a general idea. We come in, we figure it out. But like the show does not look like it was figured out on the spot. It's like the compositions are beautiful. The lighting's like incredible. You know, like you have really nice wide shots. You have like incredible steady cam shots and walk and talks. Like you did an episode, I think it was yours, with Gator and Dave and, or not maybe Gator, but his friend that's like the producer, the music producer. Where Benny, where it's like a oneer, like in the recording studio, like kind of just these long, really well thought out, planned out shots that don't seem like you just like come up with them on the spot, you know?
Oh, I definitely have a handful of them, and a few of them made the finale of season 1. But for the most part, that's like Dave will be like, "No, the scene plays better if you just cut into the single here." And really, the idea for a oneer is just something where Brian will be like, okay, yeah, I like the idea for the oneer, but instead of doing this, I'm going to do this. And you do talk about that stuff on a tech scout.
Yeah,
like
one's surprising someone with a oneer, right?
I guess it's like the blocking rehearsal is like, instead of sitting down on this line, you're sitting down on this line. And,
right. But let's say you wanted to do like a Dutch angle, you know, and you want to rotate as Dave sits up on a couch or something. And random example, but something where you would need a piece of equipment, you know, to do the camera move, or a lighting cue or something, you know.
I mean, we have a pretty full truck. So like there was one where I'm like, oh, we might want to do like a really long, a zoom, a slow servo zoom that goes to like 250 or something. And we talked about getting that lens. Ultimately, those are like conversation starters. But in my episodes, we haven't done anything really too far. We got a different like lens kit for, there's the jail music video in the finale of season 1 that has like an entirely different aesthetic. And like that was a section where we storyboarded. But that's because it like was supposed to look different than the rest of the show.
You did one of my favorite episodes where he has the flashback to when they're pitching like Mountain Dew. Is that?
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, man, that show. I think that show is so good. If you are listening and you haven't seen it, you should check it out.
Thank you.
When you do see a scene like that servo zoom example you have, or a oneer, like how do you look at the script and decide like, oh, this would be a cool zoom shot? Like how do you design the scene from the script, you know?
I mean, that's a gut thing, right? Like
do you have a printed out script and you write notes on it and you're like, how can we make this cooler or more interesting or capture this feeling?
Yeah, you have scriptation and you jot stuff down, and I have an iPad and I go through it a few times, and you're like, could this be cool? Could this be cool? And often, even before going to Brian, I'll be like, what do you think of like a big oneer for this scene? Dave is super ambitious with the look of the show, and sometimes he'll champion certain things like this, but sometimes he's like, no, this scene needs to be super funny here.
So it sounds like, you know, we talked a lot about the blocking rehearsal, right? But if Dave is on the tech scout, right, and you're having a handful of like teeny tiny conversations, whether it's like catching someone at lunch or like shooting them a text or whatever, it sounds like it evolves, right? It's not like you sit alone do your scriptation notes, and then show up on the day and you're like, this is what I was thinking, right? So I think it's incremental, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. I probably understand, because there is the tech scout. They're not blindsided by like, whoa, you want us to shoot in the kitchen and we're shooting in the living room. It's more when I talk about like, I'm presenting my version of the scene. It's like, I think I act out what the characters are doing in real time. Whereas the tech scout is like, all right, this is a scene that happens with them watching TV. We should be prepared to light this way, and to have like a master out here. And then and then they'll talk to the G&E and make sure we are.
And you could even be like, I was thinking, oh, this is where it could be really cool to shoot this with something special.
Exactly.
Like this is where
like,
a long
I want
lens
this to be like a long tracking shot. I want, like, we're going to need a steady cam for this because I want to come from this room to this room. Like, those are things that are discussed, but there's still a tremendous amount that is like figured out when the actual actors are in the space, in that blocking rehearsal.
Right. Awesome. Well, I think it's like there always has to be the room for a little bit of spontaneity, right? You made the point of like, there's a reason why your truck doesn't have cherry picked exactly every single little piece of gear that you need. You've got a good number of toys so that when someone is like, wait a minute, wouldn't it be better if this happened? Or, that you have the chance to pivot a little bit, it sounds like.
Exactly. And you know what? I think a part of that is you have Jeff Schaffer, who is the showrunner of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he did like the show The League. Like, that is a show that's like just based on improv and like, let's just let the characters do the work and not get precious about the look. Like, super unpretentious. Like, let's just be the funniest show possible. And the best way to do that is just like 2 cameras, cross coverage. That way any joke, any piece of improv can cut together. And Dave is like, no, this needs to be the best show on television. It can't look like it can't look like Curb Your Enthusiasm. It has to be elevated and artistic. And he's like, he'll have watched some new French movie that week that he's like, why doesn't our show look as real as this? And he's coming with stuff like that. It's these two opposite forces that are like Jeff Schaffer, like, let's make the most cogent story with the funniest character reactions that we possibly can, based with this like ambition to also have this higher level of this higher aesthetic. And this sort of blocking rehearsal happy medium is what allows the actors to generate, but also have this higher look. Like, that's why the show kind of nets out where it does. I don't know, if you look at something like, it's crazy how good like Euphoria looks. Everything must just be like completely architected because it can't account for too much like improv, and
they're not cutting jokes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Before we pivot away from Dave, I want to ask, it sounds to me like a big takeaway about this conversation is that clearly your showrunner / star, his filmmaking vocabulary, his visual acumen, his understanding of filmmaking in general, you've watched it sort of evolve, right? He started off as a super funny, super talented, super ambitious rapper, right? YouTube rapper, comedy rapper, and now is running, this lauded show on television, right? And so you're seeing him, the effects of him watching that French movie every single weekend or whatever. Besides him becoming more prescriptive, it sounds like, are there other things you've noticed about the way that he's changed as an artist?
He's always had the same ambition, and like the idea of releasing something before it's absolutely perfect is like impossible to him. And I think that's the reason for his success. But, I know personally, like, he looks back at some of his early work and cringes at it, like all of us do. We all kind of go through that trajectory. His level of belief in himself as an artist allows him the confidence to like go to a brilliant cinematographer like Brian Lannon and have the confidence to be like, I just watched this film last weekend. Why doesn't our show look this good? And it's like kind of an insane thing to say, but it like is constantly forcing them to have these conversations, and Dave learns from those conversations. I think Brian feels emboldened to like fight the line producer on certain things. Like, no, Dave needs this. He's I imagine it's an incredibly stressful show for Brian because from the top.
I thought you were going to say for the line
like,
producer.
Well, the line producer too. They'll be like, why do we need all of these things for what's supposed to be a sitcom about a rapper with a small dick? I've learned so much. Like I said earlier, that he's my Tyler Durden, and yeah, there are some times in like on my show where I'll have a conversation with the network and the studio, and I'll channel my inner Dave Bird, because you're like, you got to do what is right for the project. Like, you owe it to your crew who wants to get a second season, who, everybody's put their blood, sweat, and tears through the cruel hours that you have on set, so that like, if I'm not going to fight for this little detail in post, it's like, it's a disservice to the whole team. And I've been really inspired by his crazy mind and his relentlessness.
I think on that note, let's maybe segue to our final type of project you would design, which, we're talking about short form stuff, maybe a commercial. I think on Dave, you have this like powerhouse creative force that is, running the show, and you're trying to fit into that and support that. And like you said, you have the TV show. So you have an existing crew, you have trucks with all the gear you would ever want. You need a dolly, you need a crane, you need whatever, you kind of have it. But when you're doing a 1-day shoot, a 2-day shoot, commercial, you need to tell them exactly what you need, and they will get just exactly what you need. And you are probably pretty much the person that's saying where we're putting the camera, what we're doing, what people are wearing, what the art direction looks like. But unlike your own TV show, it's a situation where you have clients. You don't have the final say. You're expected to make a decision on every single aspect of the production, but you can get overridden on some things. Can you tell us a little bit? I don't know if you want to choose like a recent project you did, or just in general.
I think I'll talk generally, because I'm envious of like a director who could go and do a director scout and just kind of do a storyboard off of a location scout and pictures and stuff. I find that I really need to be in the space when I can, but it's money. It's maybe another day from the cinematographer. And a lot of times the cinematographer is not going to be like, you get them for the tech scout and the shoot. But for me, I really like to do the location scouts. You pick your location, and then early on, like a week ahead or 4 days ahead at least from the tech scout, I like to do a separate director scout with the cinematographer, where we do like our own photo boards, and allow somebody who is often smarter than me, a cinematographer who has a better eye for stuff like this. That's the spot where he can go and be like, well, what if the camera did this instead? Or what if instead of
and also the time, like having the time to do that with someone where there's not a bunch of people waiting around and your AD's like, okay, well, the parking is going to be here or whatever. Like, are we good to go to the next location? Like
Yes.
Like no one's breathing down your neck. You can just like get into the groove and take as long as it takes,
And do you bring like a stand-in with you, or you just
producers? Yeah, there's so many pictures on my phone of me sitting in certain, acting things out. Yeah, and a lot of times too, like you had to get the location approved before that and everything. So like the storyboards have already started, because like client needs to sign off on those before like, and I'm doing these like photo boards after we've already done the storyboards. But for me, as somebody who needs to like be in the space, and I know it's different from director to director, but I'm a much more like process oriented director. And that's how I, came up with the idea of like how we would shoot American Vandal is very much like process oriented, as opposed to like I'm visualizing it in my head. I need to be like in the space with a cinematographer who's like kind of helping me walk through that stuff for me to have like a really like high end final vision of what a commercial could look like. So because I kind of know my limitations and know that like the best version of the commercial isn't going to be something that I draw up based off of a single like location scout. I need to make up for that by like finding a cinematographer who is maybe not their first choice, but it's like, hey, but we can get him 4 days earlier for my director scout. And I'm telling you, that's going to be so worth it in the long run. So that's my only really insight into the more dedicated, like architected, storyboarded type of stuff is leaning on people who have a little bit more of that skill set than I do.
Well, and also insisting on building the space to get there. Tony, you're being really modest, but I think that like it feels like there's kind of two different schools of thought. There's the like auteur, I'm a genius and you just do exactly what I say and it's going to be awesome. And there are those people out there, but like anytime I've watched one of those people work, I know that they're missing out on the awesome things that their other crew members could have brought to the table if you built the space for it. Whether that's getting an additional day in the space with your collaborators and figuring it out together, or on a tech scout with your showrunner, like building in those opportunities to kind of play a little bit and experiment in low stakes environments, I think is a really valuable takeaway, actually. And it's easier said than done, right? Sometimes you don't get that extra day out of your cinematographer or they're not free or whatever, but like,
no, I guess
fighting for that.
Unfortunately, awesome. Like it's maybe 50-50. As much as I'm like, this is the only way I work. I need this director scout. Like that's normally how I go in. And quite often it's like, no, you gotta do the storyboards. And like the first time you're in the space with your cinematographer is the tech scout. That happens very frequently and you have to do it. But it's just like what I tell the world my process is this other version because I know that's the best way to make something.
I'm curious though, like how important is it for you to shoot it in a way that hasn't been done before? That's like not the obvious way, you know, like to avoid like wide shot, close up. Or does it just depend on the project?
It really does depend on the project. Like I don't necessarily go into a commercial and be like, I need to shoot this in a way that's never been done before, or this might sound pretentious, but when I think of my voice, I think the people who like my stuff laugh at the same things that I laugh at, and I don't really apply it much more beyond that. Like I don't really think of like, and it's because of this shooting style, or it really is. I like what I like. And if this is the version that makes me laugh the most, I assume that people who have responded to my work in the past will continue to respond to that. You could find common threads between any two works of art. You could find common threads between Dave and American Vandal. But really, like, it's somewhat freeing to just go, I want to make each choice as like the choice I would enjoy the most if I was in the audience. That's pretty much it.
Most of your stuff, like the camera is moving a lot, right? Except for maybe like these interviews, the interview segments and the mockumentary stuff. Like is camera movement something you think a lot about?
For the mockumentary stuff, it's about like realism is what makes the jokes the funniest and what makes the character turns the most compelling. Dave is a really case by case thing where a lot of times like an artful move can keep you in it. There's a lot of like back and forth banter where if I'm being really precious about trying to keep some sort of oneer, I'm just limiting like what is going to be better as like Gata, Dave, Gata, Dave, Gata, Dave. I really do try to like look at every scene as like, what is the version of this scene I would most like to watch? And go from there.
You make me think of there was one time, maybe it was on the show, maybe not, but like you were talking about the number of likes on Instagram posts from high school kids. Yeah. And that sort of detail is very funny to me. It was like people were making, like an editor had comped in something that was like, 2,000 likes on, whatever, a turd burglar post or something. And you were like, no, it needs to be 47. Or whatever, like high school viral or something like that, right?
Yeah, the American Vandal goes viral within the world of the show, and I'm like, but for us, viral is like fifth on our videos and like was a staff pick on Vimeo and got like 70,000 views. I love the more grounded, real version of it. Like the audience isn't going to be less engaged in that story beat because it's 70,000 views versus 500,000 views. We all know it's fictional. If you're telling us that 70,000 views is big in this world, the more you can kind of steer away from a scene where a boss is a dickhead. Well, what's like the most subtle version of how big of a dickhead he is? And if you read it and like it feels too familiar, like I just have like a sense of when stuff is feeling like too familiar and finding other ways to like preserve what the point of the scene is without resorting to stuff that is too familiar. I think what I've done is developed a confidence in my sensibility for like, that's not right. That doesn't ring true. And I'm increasingly less like enamored, but when everybody around Video Village is like, oh, that was great. I'm like, nah, but there's still something that's like not right to me about this performance. Something still feels a little tired. I do think I have like, when you get to the edit, I have a pretty good batting average of like, yeah, see, the scene still works without that like really obvious reaction shot.
There is like a certain kind of confidence and also just instinct to run away from the Hollywood fakeness of things. Like even like A Modern Family, which is like one of the greatest comedies of all time. Like we talked about how it's made, there's a falseness to it, which is fine, right? It's not important for that show, but like I do think that that's interesting and avoiding those tropes. Like Matt was asking earlier, like how do you make good stuff? And I think that's it. We have these like just obvious things that we can do at every time. And it's like trying to not do the obvious thing every time.
And there's a little bit of a balance because it's not like my stuff is completely void of tropes or archetypes. I just have a particular taste of like, this stuff reads too tired and too Hollywood to me. And this stuff makes me laugh and it is funny. And you just try to steer it in the direction of my taste. And I've grown a little bit more confident in that. Like if I'm really responding to it and I think this is a good version, I've found that it's connected with people and that like, that's a fun thing to kind of snowball and it allows me to channel my Dave Bird, who just has that inherently, right? He's always like, what I'm creating is a masterpiece. And it's not until like 5 years later where he's like, oh, maybe that wasn't a masterpiece, but the next thing is going to be a masterpiece. It is helpful to have that sort of assurance when you're making the decisions.
Yeah, but I think the reason American Vandal is such a success and like won a Peabody and all that stuff is like there are 1,000 bad versions of that show, right? Like the pitch is good, like it's we're skewering true crime, making a murder, the Jinx, whatever, but it's these kids draw dicks on the principal's car or whatever instead, right? Like you could see the really bad version, but then you cast a guy, as the lead that is like so sympathetic and is like. He's kind of exactly what you think he is, but he's also totally not, like every obvious thing he would do, he doesn't do, and so I think it's like, it's those details that make something watchable. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that, but it does make sense now that I think about it.
That's nice of you to say. I appreciate that.
Well, Tony, this has been awesome. Thanks for coming back. How can people see your show, your next show? When's it coming out?
It's on Paramount Plus, and it comes out, I think we just got a date, and it's June 16th. So,
hey, congrats, man. That's exciting.
Yeah.
We had another Paramount Plus filmmaker on here that I think you were the EP of his show.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Did you have Mike and Jackson or just Mike?
Yeah, we had Mike and Jackson. Yeah.
They're the best. I love both of those guys. I would recommend everybody go to Minden, Ontario. And it's a cute time. And then watch For Heaven's Sake on Paramount Plus.
That you get the most out of your subscription this way.
Yeah,
right?
But wait to sign up for Paramount Plus until Players comes out. So we get them on for that. And then once you're done watching Players, then go back and watch
For
Heaven's Sake.
Are you allowed to tell us?
Which is directed by an editor on Players. Really good editor.
Oh, cool.
Tim Johnson.
Are you allowed to tell us who's in Players or anything else? Or is it kind of...
The big A-list talent on Players is Riot Games. They're allowing us to come into their world and use League of Legends, which is the biggest video game for, the biggest esport in the world. We're shooting in their arena with all of their casters. And so that's
pretty awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. That's a level of authenticity that, like, anytime, like you have to cut to like a fake video game or whatever, you're like, well, this is not, come on, guys.
Yeah. Because then our jokes can be so much sillier and you're like still invested. But like if the video game becomes a joke, then this character stakes, like winning the championship, kind of becomes a joke. And it's cool to like actually have something that feels like a sport that, in success of American Vandal, you're like, oh, this is a funny joke that's like kind of a sketch premise. And then by episode 2, you're like, I really want to know who drew that. Like the engine is actually the mystery. And I think it's like in Success, Players are going to be the same thing where you're like, all right, there's a sports doc making fun of like gamer nerds. And by episode 2, you're like, God, I hope the bot lane gets it together because cream cheese and organism both have so much potential,
That's awesome. Well, we can't wait to watch it. Do you mind hanging around for an unpaid endorsement real quick?
Sure, yeah.
Unpaid endorsements.
So my unpaid endorsement is an Instagram account called Night Lotion. Do you guys know this account?
No.
I'll read you the bio. It is an account dedicated to women on TV applying lotion before bed. And it is just a montage of just like every time basically a character needs to be quote unquote going to bed, but like needs a little bit of business, just like to stall, just like get a plot point out. And so like in real life, normally they just like be like, okay, good night and turn off and go to bed. Night Lotion is just like the weird trope of in television of women putting on lotion all the time. So Instagram.com/nightlotion. Tony, what you got, buddy?
We just finished Pam and Tommy, which I thought was really, really well done. Heartbreaking. Such a fascinating character study that leaves you with so many conflicting feelings that I'm kind of working through myself.
One of the editors, Eric Kisak, was just on the podcast, and I ran into him a couple of days ago, and I was like, how much of that is true? Because we just finished watching it. And he's like, honestly, like 95%. I was like, oh, like the mob, and the Andrew Dice Clay character that plays like the mobster. He's like, yeah, Butchie, he's a real guy. Like all the, like the Seth Rogen character, everyone is like, he said like the details of the crime are like almost like exactly the same.
Pam and Tommy. Oren, what you got, buddy?
I'm also going to go with just very popular things to watch. I'm going to double down on Euphoria. Tony mentioned it. Yeah, it is hard to watch. Do not watch it with your parents. It's like very graphic and very extreme. And I think not at all like true to life in many ways, but there is like a naturalness. There's something just so like captivating about it. And the second season, I think story-wise, it's similar to the first season, but visually, I read that they wanted to capture what it feels like to remember things, like memories, and they switched from digital to film. Tony, we know if we want to find out more about you, we just go to TonyYacenda.com. Are you on Instagram?
I'm on, T Yacenda on
T Yacenda,
Twitter and Instagram.
And you can follow our show at Just Shoot It Pod across all social media. You can email us if you have any questions. You can forward them to Tony, justshootitpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, how you design scenes, what your process is. You can find me on social media. I'm at SmiteyPyleg on Twitter and at O'Kaplan on everywhere else.
And I'm at Mr. Matt Enlow across all social media. This episode was edited by Noah Bayshore. Thanks, Noah. And you're listening to music provided by the Free Music Archive and the artist Jazar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.